The morning sun cast long shadows across the Clearwater Ranch as I stood on the porch my late husband Thomas had built with his own hands. The telegram in my trembling fingers contained words that would shatter any mother's heart. "We're going tomorrow. Ma, I've sold your cattle ranch. We needed the money for Europe. Don't try to stop us. Sarah." My daughter had just sold our family's legacy, our 2,000 acres of Colorado territory land. But as I watched that telegram flutter in the mountain wind, I smiled, because there was something my dear daughter didn't know about her half-Cheyenne mother, something that would teach her the true meaning of betrayal in the unforgiving frontier. I'm Martha Clearwater, and I'm about to show you how a half-Cheyenne ranch woman taught her ungrateful daughter the hardest lesson of the Colorado frontier. Sometimes the greatest love requires the toughest choices. My story will change how you think about family forever. They say betrayal is hardest when it comes from the ones you love most. Have you ever faced that pain? Write your name and where you're from below. I'd be grateful to know I'm not the only heart carrying this kind of wound. I woke before dawn, as I had every morning for the past 6 months since Thomas passed. The empty space beside me in our bed still felt cold, even though the Colorado summer was warming the high country. Through our bedroom window, I could see the first pale light touching the peaks of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, painting them the color of fresh blood, a sight that never failed to remind me of the Cheyenne name my mother had given me, Mape, meaning sky woman, for I was born during the dawn. Slipping from beneath the quilts Thomas's sister had sewn for our wedding 15 years ago, I padded barefoot to the window. Our ranch spread out below like a patchwork of green pastures and golden hayfields, with the South Platte River cutting a silver ribbon through the valley. 2,000 acres of the finest grazing land in all of Colorado territory, and every inch of it earned through Thomas's honest work as sheriff and my own knowledge of the land that came from my Cheyenne blood. I dressed quickly in my riding skirt and boots, braiding my long black hair still thick at 58, with only threads of silver that caught the morning light. Before leaving the house, I stopped at the small altar I kept in the corner of our bedroom, where Thomas's badge sat beside a medicine bundle my mother had given me when I married him. The white settlers in Pueblo Creek had never quite known what to make of Sheriff Clearwater's half-breed wife, but Thomas had never asked me to hide who I was. "Maheo," I whispered in Cheyenne, offering tobacco to the 4 directions as my mother had taught me. "Guide my steps this day. Help me be wise like the eagle, strong like the buffalo." Then, in English, I added, "Thomas, if you can hear me up there, I'm going to need your strength for what's coming." The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine from the high country and the earthy smell of cattle. Our ranch hands were already moving. I could see Miguel Santos, our foreman, directing the other men toward the north pasture where we kept our prize breeding stock. Miguel had worked for us since the beginning, a vaquero from New Mexico who understood cattle better than most men understood their own wives. "Buenos dias, Señora Martha," Miguel called, touching his hat brim as I approached. His weathered face creased with the same concern I'd seen there every morning since Thomas died. "The cattle, they are restless this morning. Perhaps a storm coming from the mountains." I nodded, though I suspected the restlessness came from something other than weather. Animals could sense when the natural order of things was disturbed, and the telegram burning in my apron pocket had certainly disturbed mine. We rode out together toward the grazing herds, our horses' hooves drumming a familiar rhythm against the hard-packed earth. The Clearwater Ranch ran mostly Herefords, sturdy red and white cattle that could handle the Colorado winters and the thin air at our elevation. Thomas had been proud of our herd, nearly 500 head of prime beef that supplied meat to the mining camps up in the mountains and the growing town of Pueblo Creek. "Miguel," I said as we crested a small rise that gave us a view of the entire north pasture. Did you know my daughter was planning to visit?" His dark eyes flicked to mine, and I saw understanding there. Miguel had been present for some of Sarah's visits over the years, had seen how she looked at the ranch with calculating eyes, especially after she married that smooth-talking James Morrison from back east. "No, Señora, but I have been thinking, perhaps it is time to make some changes around here. Legal changes." Smart man, Miguel. He'd worked ranches long enough to know that when the patriarch died, vultures started circling. What he didn't know was that Thomas had been far more clever than any of us realized. As we checked the cattle, counting heads and looking for signs of sickness or injury, I found myself remembering the early days when Sarah was just a little girl with braids like mine, following Thomas around the ranch and begging to help with the branding. She'd been fascinated by my Cheyenne stories then, had wanted to learn the old songs and the names of the plants my mother used for medicine. When had that changed? When had my heritage become something that embarrassed her instead of something that made her proud? The sun was climbing higher now, turning the grass from silver to green and warming my shoulders through my cotton blouse. In a few hours, the summer heat would be fierce. But for now, the morning was perfect, the kind of morning that made a person grateful to be alive in this beautiful, harsh country. "Señora," Miguel said quietly, pointing toward the ranch house. "Someone comes." I turned to see a rider approaching at a hard gallop, dust rising behind his horse like smoke. Even at this distance, I could tell it was Billy Patterson, the young man who carried telegrams and mail between Pueblo Creek and the outlying ranches. My heart began to beat faster, though whether from dread or anticipation, I couldn't say. The telegram in my pocket had been just the beginning. I realized whatever Sarah and James had set in motion was about to reach the next stage. "Come," I told Miguel, turning my horse toward home. "I think our quiet morning is about to end." Billy Patterson's news hit me like a physical blow. Sarah and James hadn't just sold the ranch, they'd sold it to the Colorado Mining Consortium, the same Eastern company that had been trying to buy up water rights all through the valley. The same company that cared nothing for the delicate balance we'd built between the Anglo settlers, the Mexican families, and the Cheyenne who still hunted in our high pastures under the old agreements Thomas had negotiated. "They can't do that, can they, Mrs. Clearwater?" Billy asked, his young face creased with worry. At 19, he'd grown up on these lands, had learned to ride on horses from our remuda. "I mean, this ranch. It's been like the heart of the whole valley." I folded the legal papers he'd brought, my hands steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Thank you for bringing these so quickly. Billy, you'd better head home now, we're expecting company this afternoon." As Billy rode away, I stood in the ranch yard, looking at the preparations Miguel and the other hands had been making all morning. Today was the monthly gathering we'd hosted ever since Thomas and I were married, a tradition that brought together all the families in our part of the territory, Anglo ranchers and their wives, Mexican vaqueros and their children, and often Chief Running Bear with some of the young Cheyenne men who worked as scouts and hunters. Thomas had started these gatherings as a way to keep peace in the valley, but they'd grown into something more, a celebration of the fact that different peoples could work together on this harsh frontier. We'd share food, settle disputes, plan for the coming seasons, and let our children play together regardless of the color of their skin or the language their parents spoke at home. Today's gathering would be the first since Thomas died, and I knew everyone would be watching to see if the tradition would continue. What they didn't know was that it might be the last gathering ever held on Clearwater land. By noon, the ranch yard was filled with wagons and horses. Doc Eleanor Hayes had arrived first, as always, her medical bag in one hand and a pot of her famous beans in the other. Eleanor was one of the few women doctors in the territory, a spinster from Boston who'd come west after the war and never looked back. "Martha, you look tired," she said, studying my face with those sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Are you sleeping? Well enough?" I lied, helping her carry food to the long tables Miguel had set up under the cottonwood trees. "How are things in town? Busy. Too busy, if you ask me. All these mining company men coming through, asking questions, making offers on land that's not for sale." She paused, giving me a meaningful look. "At least, I thought it wasn't for sale." Before I could respond, the Morales family arrived in their wagon, followed by the Hendersons from the next ranch over. Soon the yard was filled with the sound of children laughing and adults calling greetings in English, Spanish, and occasionally Cheyenne. Maria Morales, Miguel's wife, embraced me warmly. "Comadre," she said, using the term that meant we were more than friends, we were family by choice. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," I said, though I could see the concern in her dark eyes. The Mexican families in our valley had suffered their own losses to eastern land grabbers and mining companies. They understood what it meant to have your home threatened by people who saw land only as something to be exploited. The afternoon sun was high and hot when Chief Running Bear arrived with 3 of his nephews. My uncle, my mother's brother, was 70 now, his long hair white as snow, but he still sat his horse like a man half his age. The sight of him always made my heart lift, connecting me to the part of myself that some of the white settlers would never understand. "Naco," he said in Cheyenne as he dismounted, calling me my daughter as he had since I was small. The spirits whisper of changes coming, dark changes. "Uncle," I replied in the same language, "your spirits speak truly. We need to talk." But first, there was the ritual of the gathering to observe. Tables groaned under the weight of food: Eleanor's beans, Maria's tamales, fresh bread from the Henderson women, and the beef I'd had Miguel slaughter and roast over mesquite coals. Children ran between the tables while their parents talked and laughed, the easy familiarity of people who'd learned to depend on each other. I stood for a moment, watching it all, trying to memorize every detail. Tom Henderson was showing one of Running Bear's nephews how to braid a lariat. The Morales children were teaching the Henderson kids a Spanish song. Eleanor was deep in conversation with Running Bear about some medicinal plant that grew in the high country. This was what Sarah had sold, not just land and cattle, but a community, a way of life that had taken years to build and could be destroyed in a single season. "Friends," I called out, my voice carrying across the yard. Gradually, the conversations died down and all eyes turned to me. "I want to thank you all for coming today, especially during this difficult time." I saw nods of understanding. Everyone knew how much I'd depended on Thomas, how lost I'd seemed in the months since his death. "Some of you may have heard rumors about changes coming to our valley. I want you to know that whatever happens, the bonds we've built here, the friendships, the partnerships, the trust, those things are stronger than any piece of paper." "See," called out Miguel, "we stand together, like always." "Like family," added Maria, and several others nodded agreement. But even as they spoke these words of support, I could see the worry in their faces. They all knew what it meant when Eastern mining companies moved into an area. The delicate balance we'd maintained would be shattered in favor of profit and efficiency. Chief Running Bear rose slowly, his weathered face grave. "In the old days," he said in English accented but clear, "when the soldiers came to drive us from our lands, they always said the same thing. They said it was for our own good. They said change was coming whether we wanted it or not. He paused, his dark eyes meeting mine. But my niece Martha has taught me that sometimes, when change comes, the wise woman finds a way to change with it while keeping what matters most. Before I could ask what he meant, a new sound reached us, the thunder of hooves approaching fast. We all turned to see a stranger riding hard toward the ranch, his city clothes dusty from travel, his horse lathered with sweat. He pulled up at the edge of our gathering, his eyes scanning the mixed crowd with obvious distaste before settling on me. "Mrs. Martha Clearwater?" he asked, his eastern accent cutting through the afternoon air like a blade. "I am. My name is Cornelius Blackwood, representing the Colorado Mining Consortium. I have papers that require your immediate attention." The festive atmosphere died instantly. Children moved closer to their parents. The men's hands drifted toward their gun belts, not threateningly, but with the unconscious wariness of people who'd learned that trouble often came wearing a suit and carrying legal documents. "Mr. Blackwood," I said calmly, "as you can see, we're in the middle of a community gathering. Perhaps you could return tomorrow." "I'm afraid this can't wait," he said, dismounting and pulling a leather portfolio from his saddlebags. "The sale of this property has been completed, and you have 30 days to vacate the premises." The silence that followed Blackwood's announcement was deafening. Even the children seemed to sense that something terrible was happening. Pressing closer to their parents while their eyes darted between the strange man in the expensive suit and me, I took the papers from Blackwood's outstretched hand, my fingers steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. The legal language was dense and full of whereas and heretofores, but the meaning was crystal clear. Sarah Elizabeth Clearwater Morrison, as sole heir to the Clearwater Ranch, had sold the property, livestock, and water rights to the Colorado Mining Consortium for the sum of $50,000. $50,000. For land that Thomas and I had built into something worth 3 times that amount. "There must be some mistake," Doc Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the shocked murmurs. "Sarah wouldn't. She couldn't do this to her own mother." But I was reading further, and the truth was worse than I'd imagined. According to the documents, Sarah had signed an affidavit claiming that I was mentally incompetent due to grief, unable to manage the ranch's affairs, and that she was acting in my best interests by selling to prevent financial ruin. My own daughter had declared me insane to steal my home. "Mrs. Clearwater," Blackwood said, his tone suggesting he was being remarkably patient with a feeble-minded old woman. "I understand this is difficult, but the sale is completely legal. Your daughter provided all the necessary documentation, including medical statements about your condition." "What medical statements?" Eleanor demanded, her physician's instincts aroused. "I'm the only doctor who's examined Martha since Thomas died, and I've signed no such documents." Blackwood consulted his papers. According to this, a doctor, James Morrison of Denver, certified that Mrs. Clearwater is suffering from severe melancholia and is unable to make rational decisions regarding her property. The bastard. James Morrison wasn't even a real doctor. He'd bought a fake medical degree from some diploma mill back east. But apparently, it was good enough to convince a court that had never met me. "Where is Sarah now?" I asked, my voice remarkably calm considering the rage building inside me like a prairie fire. "Mrs. Morrison and her husband departed for Europe 3 days ago," Blackwood replied. "They left instructions that you should be accommodated in a suitable facility until more permanent arrangements can be made." A suitable facility. They wanted to put me in an asylum. Chief Running Bear stepped forward, his weathered hand resting on the knife at his belt. "In the old ways," he said quietly, "when someone betrayed their family like this, they were cast out, made to wander alone until the spirits decided their fate." "Uncle?" I said in Cheyenne. "Not now." But Miguel was already speaking, his voice thick with anger. "This is not right. Señora Martha, she is not crazy. She runs this ranch better than most men run theirs. I'm afraid the law doesn't recognize character references from hired help," Blackwood said dismissively, and I saw several of the men take a step forward. "Easy," I said, raising my hand. The last thing we needed was violence. It would only give the mining company an excuse to bring in the territorial marshal. Tom Henderson, whose family had been our neighbors for 10 years, cleared his throat. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't know what kind of papers you're carrying, but I know Martha Clearwater. She's one of the strongest, smartest women in this territory. If her daughter told you she was incompetent, then her daughter lied." "Yeah," called out one of the other ranchers. "We've all seen Martha work. She knows cattle, she knows the land, and she knows how to handle business better than most men I could name." Blackwood's expression grew impatient. "Gentlemen, ladies, I understand your loyalty to Mrs. Clearwater, but the law is the law. The sale has been completed, the money has been transferred, and the new owners want to begin mining operations as soon as possible. Mining operations on land where children played, where cattle grazed, where 3 different peoples had learned to live in harmony." "What about the agreements?" I asked. "The treaties Thomas negotiated with the Cheyenne for hunting rights, the water-sharing arrangements with the Mexican families. Those were informal agreements with the previous owner," Blackwood said with a shrug. "The consortium is under no obligation to honor them." I saw the pain flash across Chief Running Bear's face, the anger in Miguel's eyes, the worry in the faces of all the families who had built their lives around the stability our ranch provided. "Mrs. Clearwater," Blackwood continued, "I've been authorized to offer you a generous settlement. The consortium will pay for your relocation to Denver, where you can receive proper medical care and provide a monthly allowance for your living expenses." "How generous?" I said quietly. "More generous than required by law." He replied, "Your daughter was quite concerned about your welfare. My daughter, who had sold my home, stolen my legacy, and declared me insane. All to fund her European adventure with a man who wasn't even qualified to treat a sick horse, much less diagnose mental illness. But as I stood there, surrounded by friends who were ready to fight for me, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not despair, but a cold, clear certainty. Sarah thought she knew who she was dealing with. She thought I was just a grieving widow, lost without her husband, easy to manipulate and discard. She had forgotten that I was also the daughter of a Cheyenne medicine woman who had taught me that the strongest victories come to those who are patient, who watch and wait and strike only when the moment is perfect. "Mr. Blackwood," I said, folding the papers carefully, "I'll need some time to consider your offer. Ma'am, with respect, you don't have much choice in the matter. The sale is final, and you have 30 days to vacate. I understand." I looked around at the faces of my friends, my chosen family. "But I'm not leaving today, and I'm not leaving tomorrow. This gathering isn't over, and neither am I." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Clearwater, I hope you're not planning to cause trouble. The consortium has resources you can't imagine, and they don't tolerate interference with their business operations." "Mr. Blackwood," Chief Running Bear said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had negotiated with generals and governors. "You are a guest on Cheyenne hunting grounds. Our agreements with Sheriff Clearwater's widow are not written on your papers. The territorial government doesn't recognize Indian land claims," Blackwood replied coldly. "The territorial government recognizes bullets," Miguel said quietly, and several other men nodded agreement. I could see this escalating quickly into something that would end badly for everyone I cared about. "Gentlemen," I said firmly. "Mr. Blackwood is leaving now. Aren't you, Mr. Blackwood?" He looked around at the circle of hard faces surrounding him, calculating odds. Whatever he saw there convinced him that discretion was the better part of valor. 30 days. Mrs. Clearwater, he said, mounting his horse. "After that, the territorial marshal will be involved, and things will become unpleasant." As he rode away, the gathering slowly came back to life, but the festive mood was gone. People spoke in low voices, making plans, offering help they couldn't afford to give. "Martha," Eleanor said quietly, "what are you going to do?" I watched Blackwood disappear over the ridge, then turned to look at the ranch house Thomas had built. The land we'd worked together, the community we'd created. "I'm going to remind my daughter who she's dealing with," I said. "And I'm going to teach her that some lessons can only be learned the hard way." As the dust settled from Blackwood's departure, the gathering transformed from a celebration into something more like a war council. Families who had come to share food and laughter were now huddled in small groups, speaking in urgent whispers about what this meant for all of us. Tom Henderson was the first to approach me directly. "Martha, you know Helen and I don't have much, but we've got that old cabin on the back 40. It's not fancy, but it's got a good roof and a stone fireplace. You're welcome to it for as long as you need." Before I could respond, Maria Morales stepped forward. "No, comadre. You come stay with us. Miguel, he can move the boys into the barn. You take their room." "Señora Martha," Miguel added, his weathered hands working the brim of his hat. "The cattle, the horses, we can move them to our place. To the Henderson place. Spread them around so the mining company. They cannot take everything at once." Their generosity overwhelmed me, but it also made the reality of the situation hit harder. These people were offering to risk their own security to help me. And what could I give them in return? I was just a widow who'd been outsmarted by her own daughter. "Or was I friends?" I said, raising my voice to address the entire gathering. "I can't tell you how much your support means to me, but I don't want any of you taking risks on my account. The Colorado Mining Consortium has lawyers, politicians, and money. They can make life very difficult for anyone who gets in their way." "Let them try," called out one of the younger ranchers. "We've been dealing with their kind since we got here. They think they can just ride in and take what they want. But this is our home." Chief Running Bear stepped closer, his dark eyes serious. "Niece," he said in Cheyenne, "walk with me." We moved away from the crowd, toward the corral where Thomas used to break horses. The old chief was quiet for a long moment, watching the horses mill about in the evening light. "Your mother," he said finally, still speaking Cheyenne. "She once told me that the white man's law and the Cheyenne way were like two rivers flowing toward the same mountain. Sometimes they run together, sometimes apart, but they both reach the high country. Uncle, I'm not sure I understand. The papers that man brought, they follow the white man's law, but there are other laws, older laws, laws about family, about honor, about what belongs to whom." He turned to face me, his weathered face grave. "Your husband," He understood both kinds of law. That's why he was a good sheriff. A good man. Something in his tone made me pay closer attention. What are you trying to tell me, Uncle? I'm telling you that Thomas Clearwater was smarter than most white men. Smart enough to know that a man who keeps the peace between different peoples must always have more than one plan. He paused, studying my face. Did he ever tell you about the old mine shaft up in the high pasture, the one where the previous owner used to hide things during the Indian troubles? My heart began to beat faster. Thomas mentioned it once, said it was played out, not worth working. Maybe played out of gold, Running Bear said with a slight smile. But a man can hide more than gold in a mine shaft. Before I could ask what he meant, Doc Eleanor approached us. Martha, I hate to interrupt, but I need to talk to you about these medical documents Blackwood mentioned. We walked back toward the house, leaving Running Bear to rejoin the other men who were still discussing ways to slow down the mining company's operations. Eleanor's face was tight with professional anger. Martha, I want you to know that I've never signed any document declaring you mentally incompetent. In fact, after Thomas died, I specifically noted in my records that you were handling your grief remarkably well, that you were fully capable of managing your affairs. I figured as much. James Morrison isn't even a real doctor, is he? Not as far as I know. I've made some inquiries through my medical contacts in Denver, and no one's heard of him in any legitimate practice. She paused at the porch steps. But Martha, here's what worries me. If they're willing to forge medical documents, what else might they be willing to do? It was a sobering thought. The Colorado Mining Consortium wasn't just wealthy and well-connected, they were apparently willing to break the law to get what they wanted. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, the last of our neighbors loaded their families into wagons and headed home. Each one stopped to shake my hand, to offer help, to promise that this wasn't over. Their loyalty touched me deeply, but it also made me more determined not to drag them into a fight they couldn't win. Miguel was the last to leave, and he pulled me aside as he prepared to mount his horse. Senora Martha, he said quietly, there is something I must tell you about the patron, about Sheriff Clearwater. What about him? Miguel glanced around to make sure we were alone. The month before he died, he asked me to do something strange. He gave me a key, told me to go to the bank in Pueblo Creek, to a safety deposit box. He said if anything ever happened to him, I should bring you the key and tell you to go there alone. My breath caught. Do you still have it? He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small brass key. I have been carrying it ever since, waiting for the right time. I think maybe that time is now. I took the key, feeling its weight in my palm. It was warm from being carried close to Miguel's heart for 6 months, and somehow that made it feel even more precious. Did Thomas say anything else? Only that you would know what to do when the time came? And that. Miguel hesitated. What? That you were stronger than you knew, and that Sarah would learn this the hard way. The same words I'd spoken to Blackwood. Almost exactly. Thomas had known this day would come. Somehow. He'd seen Sarah's true nature more clearly than I had, and he'd prepared for it. After Miguel rode away, I stood alone in the ranch yard as darkness settled over the valley. The mountains were black silhouettes against a sky full of stars, and the night air carried the scent of sage and pine. This was my home. The place where Thomas and I had built a life together, where we'd raised Sarah, where we'd created something worth preserving. Sarah thought she could take it all away with a few forged documents and legal papers. She thought I was just a grieving widow, too lost in sorrow to fight back. She was about to learn how wrong she was. I walked into the house, lit a lamp, and sat down at Thomas's old desk, in the bottom drawer, hidden under some old tax records. I found what I was looking for, a letter in Thomas's handwriting, addressed to me, with instructions that it should be opened only if something happened to him and Sarah proved to be not the daughter we hoped she would be. My hands trembled as I broke the seal and began to read. My dearest Martha, if you are reading this, it means I am gone and our daughter has shown her true colors. I pray I am wrong about Sarah, but I fear I am not. I have seen the way she looks at the ranch, the way she talks about money, the way she treats you when she thinks I'm not listening. You are not as helpless as she believes. You are not as poor as she thinks. And you are certainly not the broken woman she expects you to become. Take the key Miguel will give you. Go to the bank. Learn the truth about what we really own, what I really built for us. Then show our daughter what happens when someone underestimates a woman who has walked between two worlds and learned the strength of both. With all my love and faith in your wisdom, Thomas. I set the letter down and looked at the key Miguel had given me. Tomorrow, I would go to town. Tomorrow, I would learn what Thomas had been hiding from all of us. Tonight, I would plan how to teach Sarah the most important lesson of her life. I rode into Pueblo Creek at dawn, the brass key burning like a coal in my vest pocket. The town was just beginning to stir, smoke rising from chimneys. The blacksmith already at work. The aroma of fresh bread drifting from the bakery. It looked like any other morning, but I felt as if I was riding toward a cliff edge, not knowing whether I'd find solid ground or empty air on the other side. The first territorial bank of Pueblo Creek was a modest brick building that Thomas had helped establish when the town was incorporated 5 years ago. Samuel Morrison, the bank president, had been Thomas's friend and poker partner for years. If anyone could be trusted with whatever secrets my husband had hidden, it would be Sam. Martha, Sam called out as I tied my horse to the hitching post. Good to see you, though I have to say, you look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders. Something like that. Sam, I need to access Thomas's safety deposit box. His expression grew serious. Of course. Though I have to tell you, I've been wondering when you'd come. Thomas was very specific about the arrangement, said you'd know when the time was right. He paused, studying my face. I take it the time is right. More than right. It's necessary. Sam led me through the bank's main floor, past the teller windows and customer desks, to a heavy door marked Private. Behind it was a narrow room lined with metal boxes of various sizes. Sam consulted a ledger, then led me to box number 247, the same number that had been in Thomas's letter. I'll need to see the key, Sam said, though his tone suggested this was merely a formality. I handed him the brass key Miguel had carried for 6 months. Sam inserted it into the lock alongside his own master key, and the box opened with a soft click. I'll leave you to it, he said quietly. Take all the time you need. Just call when you're finished. Alone in the small room. I pulled the metal box from its slot and set it on the wooden table provided for such purposes. My hands were shaking as I lifted the lid. Inside were papers. Lots of papers. Deeds. Stock certificates. Bank statements, and legal documents I didn't immediately recognize. But as I began to examine them more closely, a picture emerged that left me breathless. Thomas hadn't just been the sheriff of Pueblo Creek. He'd been an investor, and a remarkably successful one. The first document I examined was a deed to a silver mine up in the mountains, not the played-out claim Running Bear had mentioned, but a different one entirely. According to the paperwork, the Clearwater mine had been producing steadily for 3 years, with profits being deposited into a separate bank account in Denver. The second document was even more surprising: stock certificates in the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. Thomas owned shares worth more than our ranch was supposedly valued at in Sarah's fraudulent sale. But it was the third set of documents that made me sit down hard in the wooden chair. Property deeds. Not just to our ranch, but to half a dozen other parcels throughout Colorado Territory. Town lots in Denver and Colorado Springs. Grazing land in 3 different counties. A hotel in Leadville that catered to mining executives. According to the papers in front of me, Thomas Clearwater, my quiet, steady sheriff husband, had been worth more than $250,000. At the bottom of the box was a letter in Thomas's handwriting, sealed with wax. My name was written across the front in his careful script. My beloved Martha, if you are reading this, then Sarah has proven to be the selfish, greedy woman I feared she was becoming. I pray I am wrong, but I have prepared for the possibility that I am right. You are not poor, my love. You have never been poor. Every dollar we saved, every small investment we made, I have multiplied through careful planning and strategic partnerships. The ranch was never our only asset, it was simply the one we chose to live on. I kept this from you not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted to protect you from the burden of managing such wealth. I also wanted to protect Sarah from the knowledge that might change her character for the worse. I see now that her character was already corrupted by smaller temptations. The silver mine is producing $3,000 a month. The railroad stocks pay dividends quarterly. The rental properties in Denver bring in another $800 monthly. You are, by any measure, a wealthy woman. But wealth without wisdom is dangerous, as Sarah is about to learn. Use these resources not just to reclaim what she stole, but to teach her the difference between earning something and simply taking it. I have left specific instructions with Samuel Morrison about how to access these funds and manage these investments. Trust his advice. He has been helping me build this empire for years. Most importantly, remember that you are not just Martha Clearwater, the sheriff's widow. You are Martha Running Deer Clearwater, daughter of 2 peoples, inheritor of 2 kinds of strength. Use both. Your devoted husband, Thomas P. S. The mineshaft Running Bear mentioned that's where I kept the original survey maps that prove our water rights extend much further than anyone realizes. The Colorado Mining Consortium will find that information very interesting when they discover they can't access the underground springs they're counting on. I sat in that small room for nearly an hour, reading through every document, trying to absorb the magnitude of what Thomas had built in secret. He'd been playing a much longer game than I'd ever imagined, preparing for contingencies I'd never considered. When I finally emerged from the vault, Sam was waiting with a cup of coffee and a knowing smile. Quite a shock, isn't it? He said gently. Sam, did you know about all of this? Every bit of it. Thomas and I spent many evenings planning investments, discussing opportunities, figuring out how to turn a sheriff's salary into something substantial. He paused. He was worried about Sarah. Martha had been for years. Said she was getting too interested in money and not interested enough in the work it takes to earn it. He was right. Usually was. So, what are you planning to do? I thought about Sarah, probably sitting in some European cafe right now, spending the money she'd stolen from what she thought was my only asset. I thought about James Morrison with his fake medical degree and his real greed. I thought about the Colorado Mining Consortium, so confident they'd bought prime mining land with unlimited water access. They were all about to learn that Thomas Clearwater's widow was full of surprises. First, I said, I'm going to wire the Territorial Attorney General's office about some forged medical documents. Then I'm going to have a conversation with the Colorado Mining Consortium about water rights they don't actually have access to. Sam's smile widened. And then I'm going to wait for my daughter to come home. Because she will come home. Sam. When James Morrison runs through her money and abandons her, which he will, she'll come crawling back expecting to find a broken old woman grateful for her charity. Instead, she'll find... I stood up, feeling stronger and more certain than I had since Thomas died. She'll find Martha running deer Clearwater, who owns more of Colorado territory than she ever dreamed, and who's about to teach her the most expensive lesson of her life. I rode home from Pueblo Creek with my head spinning and my heart pounding. The weight of Thomas's secrets felt heavier than the saddlebags full of legal documents I was carrying. $250,000. Properties scattered across 3 counties. A silver mine that produced more in a month than most families saw in a year. But more than the money, it was Thomas's faith in me that overwhelmed me. He'd built this empire not for himself, but for me. He'd seen this day coming and had prepared me to face it, even though I hadn't known I was being prepared. As I crested the hill that gave me the first view of our valley, I saw Chief Running Bear waiting by the old oak tree where Thomas used to hold informal court when disputes needed settling. The old chief was sitting cross-legged in the shade, his weathered hands working on something I couldn't make out from a distance. I dismounted and approached him with the respect due to an elder and a man who had guided me through the hardest years of my childhood, when I was caught between 2 worlds and belonged fully to neither. "Nako," he said in greeting, using the Cheyenne word for daughter. "You have the look of a woman who has seen visions." "Uncle," I replied, settling beside him in the grass. "I have seen many things today, some wonderful, some terrible." He was carving a piece of white pine, his knife moving with the steady precision of decades of practice. As I watched, the shape of a horse began to emerge from the wood. "Tell me," he said simply. So I did. I told him about the safety deposit box, about Thomas's hidden investments, about the wealth that made Sarah's theft look like a child stealing pennies from a jar. I told him about the water rights, about the mining company's assumptions, about the power I now held to destroy everyone who had wronged me. Running Bear listened without interruption, his knife never pausing in its work. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, studying the wooden horse in his hands. "Your mother," he said finally. "She once told me about a dream she had before you were born. She dreamed of a woman who stood between 2 rivers, one flowing east toward the white man's cities, one flowing west toward the setting sun. In the dream, this woman had the power to turn both rivers, to make them flow where she chose." What did the dream mean? "Your mother thought it meant you would have to choose between the Cheyenne way and the white way, but I think she was wrong." He held up the wooden horse, examining its proportions. "I think it meant you would learn to use both ways, like a rider who can handle 2 horses at once." "I don't understand." "Uncle, the white man's law says you can use your wealth to crush your enemies, to take revenge for the wrongs done to you. The Cheyenne way says that justice must restore balance, not create new imbalance." He set down his knife and looked at me directly. "Which way will you choose?" It was the question I'd been avoiding since leaving the bank. The power Thomas had given me was intoxicating. I could destroy Sarah financially, could ruin James Morrison, could make the Colorado Mining Consortium pay dearly for their arrogance. But what would that accomplish beyond satisfying my anger? What would restore balance? "Uncle, that is for you to decide, but perhaps we should look at what your husband left for you to find." He stood with the fluid grace of a much younger man and began walking toward the high pasture where the old mine shaft was located. I followed, leading my horse, curious about what other secrets Thomas had hidden. The mine shaft was in a grove of aspen trees, their leaves already beginning to turn gold with the approach of autumn. The entrance was partially concealed by brush, but Running Bear moved the branches aside as if he'd done it many times before. "You knew about this," I said. "Your husband asked me to watch over it after he died. He said you would come here when you were ready." Inside the mine shaft, about 20 feet from the entrance, was a wooden crate covered with oiled canvas. Running Bear produced a lantern from somewhere in his clothing. He'd obviously come prepared for this moment. The crate contained survey maps, water rights documents, and correspondence with territorial officials that painted a very different picture of our land than the one the mining company thought they were buying. According to these papers, the underground springs that fed our valley originated on our property and flowed through a complex system of natural channels that extended far beyond our apparent boundaries. The Colorado Mining Consortium had bought the right to mine our surface land, but they had no access to the water that would make their operation profitable. And according to territorial law, water rights were separate from mineral rights. "Thomas knew they would come for the land," I said, studying the maps by lamplight. "He knew that men who think only of gold and silver cannot see the true value of water in a dry country," Running Bear replied. "He also knew that his daughter had learned to think like such men." There was something else in the crate, a smaller box containing what looked like jewelry, but as I examined the pieces more closely, I realized they weren't ornaments at all. They were Cheyenne symbols carved in silver and gold, each one representing a different aspect of justice and wisdom. "Your mother made these," Running Bear said quietly, "before she died. She told me to give them to you when you needed to remember who you really are." I held up a silver medallion carved with the image of a woman standing between two horses. "Like the dream. Like the dream." As we walked back toward the ranch house, I felt a clarity settling over me that I hadn't experienced since Thomas died. The anger was still there, but it was no longer the driving force. Instead, I felt the calm certainty that comes when you finally understand what needs to be done. "Uncle," I said as we reached the oak tree where we'd started, "I know what kind of justice this situation requires. Tell me." "Sarah needs to learn the value of what she threw away, but she also needs the chance to earn it back. The mining company needs to understand that they can't simply take what they want, but they also need to learn to negotiate fairly. And I paused, looking out over the valley that was mine in ways Sarah had never imagined. "I need to stop hiding who I am." Running Bear smiled, the first time I'd seen him truly smile since Thomas's funeral. "Now you sound like your mother's daughter, and my husband's wife, and yourself, most importantly." That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, I sat on the porch Thomas had built and wrote 3 letters. The first was to the Territorial Attorney General, detailing the fraudulent medical documents and requesting an investigation. The second was to the Colorado Mining Consortium, inviting them to discuss water rights and suggesting that their current contract might not be as advantageous as they believed. The third letter was the hardest to write. It was addressed to Sarah, in care of the American Express office in Paris, where I knew she would eventually go to collect mail and money. "My dear daughter, by now you have probably spent a good portion of the money you stole from me. I hope you are enjoying Europe, because your time there is about to become much more expensive than you anticipated. You made several mistakes in your planning. You assumed I was helpless without your father. You assumed our ranch was our only asset. And you assumed that a half-breed woman wouldn't know how to fight back using the white man's law. All of those assumptions were wrong. When you are ready to come home and face the consequences of your choices, I will be here. but you should know that the woman you left behind no longer exists. In her place, you will find someone you should have gotten to know a long time ago, your mother. Martha Running Deer Clearwater. The responses to my letters came faster than I'd expected. Within a week, the Territorial Attorney General's office had sent an investigator to examine the forged medical documents. The Colorado Mining Consortium had dispatched their lawyers to review water rights they'd apparently never bothered to research properly. And somewhere in Europe, Sarah was about to receive a letter that would change everything she thought she knew about her mother. But it was the community's reaction that surprised me most. Word had somehow gotten out, probably through Sam Morrison, who'd never been good at keeping secrets when he was excited about something. By the time I rode into Pueblo Creek for supplies, half the town knew that the poor widow Martha Clearwater was actually one of the wealthiest landowners in Colorado Territory. Martha called out Mrs. Henderson from across the street. "Tom told me about your situation. We had no idea you were so well-positioned." I could see the curiosity in her eyes, the questions she was too polite to ask directly. How long had I known? Why had I kept it secret? What did this mean for the rest of us? At the general store? The conversation stopped when I walked in, not from embarrassment, but from a kind of respectful attention I'd never experienced before. Money, I was learning, changed how people saw you, even when you were the same person you'd always been. "Mrs. Clearwater," said the store owner, practically rushing to serve me personally. "What can I get for you today? Anything you need? Anything at all?" "Just the usual supplies, Mr. Patterson. Nothing's changed about what I need." But everything had changed about how I was treated. The deference was uncomfortable, but it was also useful. When Cornelius Blackwood arrived in town later that week with a team of lawyers and surveyors, people were eager to tell me everything they observed. "They're staying at the hotel," Doc Eleanor reported during one of her visits. "Blackwood's been asking questions about water sources, about who controls what rights. He seems agitated." "And well, he should be," I replied. "His company made some expensive assumptions." Eleanor studied my face with her physician's eye for detail. "Martha, you seem different, stronger, somehow, more yourself." She was right. For the first time since Thomas died, maybe for the first time since I'd married him, I felt like I knew exactly who I was. Not just the sheriff's wife, not just the half-breed woman trying to fit into white society, but Martha Running Deer Clearwater, a woman who belonged fully to herself. Miguel arrived that afternoon with news that made my newfound confidence feel even more solid. "Señora Martha," he said, dismounting from his horse with the careful movements of a man who'd spent too many years in the saddle. "The mining company men. They came to our place asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "About water, about where the springs come from, where they go. They offered my boys money to show them the underground channels." His weathered face creased into something that might have been a smile. "My boys, they told them to ask the owner of the land." "And what did the mining men say to that?" "They said they are the owners now. My boys. They laughed. They said, 'Maybe you own the dirt, but the water, she belongs to someone else.'" The next morning brought a formal visit from Blackwood and his legal team. I watched them ride up to the ranch house, 3 men in expensive suits looking distinctly uncomfortable on horseback. They'd brought a surveyor and what appeared to be a mining engineer, both of whom kept consulting maps and pointing at various features of the landscape. I met them on the porch, wearing my best dress and the silver medallion Running Bear had given me. Let them see exactly who they were dealing with. "Mrs. Clearwater, Blackwood said, dismounting with obvious relief. We need to discuss some complications that have arisen regarding our recent property acquisition. Mr. Blackwood, gentlemen, please, make yourselves comfortable. I gestured to the chairs Thomas had built for the porch. Though I should mention that this porch, like the rest of this house, is still my property. The sale your company arranged with my daughter covered land and mineral rights, but not existing structures or water access. One of the lawyers, a thin man with nervous eyes, consulted a thick folder of documents. Mrs. Clearwater, according to our research, water rights in this territory are typically included with land sales unless specifically accepted. Typically, yes, but not in this case. I produced my own folder copies of the documents Thomas had hidden in the mine shaft. As you can see from these territorial surveys, the water sources that supply this valley originate on property that was never included in the sale. The surveyor took the maps I offered, spreading them out on the porch table. His face grew pale as he compared them to his own charts. Mr. Blackwood, he said quietly. These maps show underground springs extending at least 2 miles beyond the boundaries of the land we purchased. If these are accurate. They are, I said calmly. Surveyed by the territorial government in 1876 and filed with the land office in Denver. My husband made sure all the paperwork was properly recorded. Blackwood's face was turning an interesting shade of red. Mrs. Clearwater, surely we can reach some accommodation. The consortium is prepared to offer generous compensation for water access rights. I'm sure you are. But first, we need to address the matter of the fraudulent sale that brought you here in the first place. Fraudulent? The nervous lawyer looked up from his documents. Mrs. Clearwater, I assure you, all the legal requirements were met. Your daughter had proper power of attorney, medical certification of your condition. Forged medical certification, I corrected. From a man who isn't qualified to treat a sick horse, much less diagnose mental illness. The Territorial Attorney General's office is very interested in how that certification was obtained. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of horses approaching. Chief Running Bear rode into the yard with 2 of his nephews, all 3 men armed and looking like they were prepared for trouble. Nako, Running Bear called in Cheyenne. Are these men causing you difficulty? No, Uncle, I replied in the same language. They are learning about the difference between taking something and earning it. Blackwood looked nervously between me and the Cheyenne men. Mrs. Clearwater, I hope you're not planning anything. Unwise. The consortium has resources, connections. We can make things very difficult for anyone who interferes with our business operations. I stood up, feeling the strength of 2 peoples flowing through me. Mr. Blackwood, you came to my territory, stole my land through fraudulent means, and threatened my community. Now you're discovering that your theft was based on incomplete information and illegal documents. I'd say you're the one who's been unwise. What do you want? He asked bluntly. Justice, I said. An education. Your company needs to learn how to do business honestly in Colorado territory. My daughter needs to learn the consequences of betraying her family. And you, personally, need to learn that a half-Cheyenne woman is not someone you can intimidate or dismiss. The mining engineer, who'd been quietly studying the water rights maps, looked up with something like respect in his eyes. Ma'am, if I may ask, how long have you known about these water rights? Since my husband died and left me instructions about how to protect what we'd built together. He was a very thorough man. Mr. Davidson, ma'am, And your husband was indeed thorough. These maps show a water system that would support a much larger operation than we initially planned. If we could negotiate access, then you'll need to negotiate with me as an equal, not as a victim of your company's fraud. And you'll need to make things right with the community you've tried to cheat. Blackwood stood up abruptly. This isn't over, Mrs. Clearwater. The consortium doesn't abandon profitable ventures because of local complications. I'm sure it doesn't, I said calmly. But it might want to consider the cost of fighting a woman who owns more of Colorado territory than your company realized, who has the backing of 3 different communities, and who's no longer interested in hiding what she's capable of. As they rode away, Running Bear approached the porch. That was well done, Nako. You sounded like your mother when she was negotiating with the soldiers. Did she win those negotiations? Usually. She understood that sometimes the best way to get what you want is to let your enemies discover how much they don't know about who they're fighting. That evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I felt a deep satisfaction I hadn't experienced in months. The game was finally beginning, and for the first time since Sarah had betrayed me, I was playing it from a position of strength. Somewhere in Europe, my daughter was about to learn that her mother was full of surprises, and somewhere in a Denver boardroom, the Colorado Mining Consortium was discovering that stealing from a half-Cheyenne woman was considerably more expensive than they'd budgeted for. 2 months after I'd sent my letter to Paris, Sarah came home. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Through the window, I could see Billy Patterson driving his mail wagon. But there was a passenger beside him, a woman in a travel-stained dress with her head down, clutching a single carpet bag. Even at a distance, even changed by hardship and disappointment, I recognized my daughter. I set down my paring knife and walked to the porch, smoothing my apron and checking that the silver medallion Running Bear had given me was visible at my throat. I wanted Sarah to see immediately that the woman she'd left behind no longer existed. Billy helped her down from the wagon with the careful courtesy he showed to all women. But I could see the pity in his eyes. Sarah looked thin, older than her 35 years, and there was a defeated set to her shoulders that I'd never seen before. Mrs. Clearwater, Billy said, touching his hat brim, brought your daughter home from the train station. She asked me to tell you she's sorry for the trouble she's caused. Thank you, Billy. I appreciate your kindness. Sarah stood in the yard, looking up at the house as if she couldn't quite believe it was still there. When her eyes met mine, I saw a flicker of surprise. Whatever she'd expected to find. It wasn't a woman wearing her best dress and Cheyenne silver, standing straight and confident on the porch her husband had built. Hello, Sarah. Mama. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I got your letter. I assumed you had. Come inside. You look like you could use a meal and a place to rest. She climbed the porch steps slowly, and I could see the effort it cost her. The confident, demanding woman who'd sold my ranch and declared me incompetent was gone. In her place was someone who looked like she'd learned some hard lessons about the world and her place in it. Inside the kitchen, I poured her a cup of coffee and set out bread, butter, and cold beef. She ate like someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days, which, I suspected, might be true. Where's James? I asked when she'd taken the edge off her hunger. Sarah's face crumpled. Gone. He left me in London, took what was left of the money and ran off with some English girl he met at a gambling house. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I had to work my passage home on a steamship, cleaning cabins, scrubbing decks. The other passengers looked at me like I was nothing. I felt a stab of sympathy for her, but I pushed it down. Sarah needed to understand the full weight of her choices before she could begin to make better ones. How much of the money is left? None. James spent it all on gambling and other women. When I confronted him, he told me I was a fool if I thought he'd ever really loved me. Said he'd only married me to get access to what he thought was your money. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Mama, I know you have every right to hate me. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I have nowhere else to go. I sat down across from her at the kitchen table where Thomas and I had shared so many meals, where we'd planned our future and discussed our hopes for our daughter. The irony wasn't lost on me that Sarah was now sitting in the same spot, begging for help instead of giving it. Tell me about London, I said. Tell me what you learned. I learned that I'm not as smart as I thought I was. I learned that money doesn't make you important if you don't earn it yourself. And I learned. She paused, struggling with words. I learned that I threw away the most valuable thing I had for something worthless, which was your love, your respect, the knowledge that I had a home where I belonged, where people cared about me not because of what I could give them, but because of who I was. Tears were flowing freely now. Mama, I sold our family's ranch. I declared you incompetent. I stole everything Daddy left you. How can you even stand to look at me? It was a fair question, and one I'd asked myself many times over the past few months. The answer had come to me gradually, through conversations with Running Bear, through reading Thomas's letters, through watching how the community had rallied around me when they thought I was powerless. Sarah, do you know what your father wrote in one of the letters he left me? She shook her head. He said that justice isn't about punishment. It's about teaching people to make better choices. He said that the difference between revenge and justice is that revenge destroys, but justice builds something better from the wreckage. What does that mean? I stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the valley, our valley, though Sarah didn't know yet how much of it was actually ours. It means that you're going to learn what you threw away by earning it back. You're going to discover what this ranch really means, what this community really is, and what it takes to be worthy of the things you took for granted. I don't understand. I turned back to face her. Sarah, you assumed I was helpless without your father? You assumed our ranch was our only asset. You assumed that a half-Cheyenne woman wouldn't know how to fight back when her own daughter betrayed her. Something in my tone made her sit up straighter, made her really look at me for the first time since she'd arrived. All of those assumptions were wrong, I continued. Your father left me far more than you realized, and I've spent the past 2 months learning how to use it. The Colorado Mining Consortium that bought our ranch from you, they're discovering that they purchased land without water rights, based on forged medical documents that are now under investigation by the Territorial Attorney General. Sarah's face went white. What are you saying? I'm saying that the sale you arranged was fraudulent and is being reversed. I'm saying that I own more of Colorado territory than you ever imagined. And I'm saying that if you want to be part of this family again, you're going to earn that privilege through honest work and genuine respect. But how the money James and I spent will be repaid through your labor, over time. The trust you broke will be rebuilt through your actions, day by day. And the daughter I raised to be selfish and entitled will learn to become a woman worthy of the name Clearwater. Sarah stared at me as if I were a stranger. You're not the same person I left here. No, I'm not. I'm the person I was always meant to be, before I started hiding who I was to make other people comfortable. I'm Martha Running Deer Clearwater, and I'm done pretending to be less than I am. She was quiet for a long time, absorbing this new reality. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and uncertain. What happens now? Now you rest. Tomorrow, you start working. Miguel can teach you about cattle. Maria can show you how to manage a household on what you earn rather than what you inherit. Doc Eleanor might have use for an assistant who's willing to learn. And Chief Running Bear can help you understand the part of your heritage you've been ashamed of. And you, I smiled, feeling a peace I hadn't known since Thomas died. I'll be here, watching you discover who you really are when you're not trying to be someone else. And if you prove worthy of it, someday I might tell you about the silver mine, the railroad stocks, and the hotel in Leadville that your father left us. Sarah's eyes widened. There's more, much more. But that's a conversation for after you've learned to value what you already have. Sarah's first day of real work began before dawn. I woke her as I had been waking myself for months while the stars were still bright and the air carried the chill of the high country. Time to get up, I said, setting a cup of coffee on the table beside the cot I'd made up for her in what used to be the sewing room. Miguel's waiting. She sat up slowly, wincing at the stiffness in her back from the thin mattress. The soft life she'd lived with James had not prepared her for frontier accommodations. What am I supposed to do? Whatever Miguel tells you to do. He's the foreman, and you're a ranch hand. The lowest paid ranch hand, since you're working off a debt that will take years to repay. I watched her dress in the worn work clothes I'd laid out an old skirt of mine, a cotton blouse that had seen better days, and boots that were sturdy but far from fashionable. The woman who had once spent more on a single dress than most families earned in a month was learning to make do with what was practical rather than what was pretty. Miguel was waiting by the corral, his weathered face impassive as Sarah approached. He'd worked for us long enough to remember her as the spoiled young woman who'd treated the Mexican workers as if they were invisible. Now she would be working alongside them, dependent on their knowledge and goodwill. Buenos dias, Señorita Sarah, he said formally. Today you learn to muck stalls. For the next 3 hours, I watched from the kitchen window as my daughter shoveled manure, hauled water buckets, and struggled to keep up with work that the other hands did without thinking. Her soft hands blistered within the first hour. Her back ached from bending and lifting, and her pride took a beating every time one of the Mexican workers had to show her how to do something she should have learned years ago. By mid-morning, when the community women arrived for our weekly quilting circle, Sarah was a sight to behold. Her hair had escaped its pins. Her skirt was stained with mud and worse, and there were tears of frustration streaming down her face as she tried to coax a stubborn cow into the milking stall. "My word," said Mrs. Henderson, watching through the window. "Is that really Sarah?" "That's my daughter learning what honest work feels like," I replied, continuing to stitch the quilt square I was working on. "She looks different," observed Maria Morales, her tone carefully neutral. "Humbled," added Doc Eleanor. "Though I have to say, Martha, this seems rather harsh." "Harsh." I set down my needle and looked at my friends. "She stole my home, declared me insane, and abandoned me to fund her European adventure. Now she's discovering what it means to earn her keep instead of simply taking what she wants." Through the window, we could see Sarah struggling with a water bucket that was too heavy for her to lift. One of Miguel's sons stepped in to help her, and I saw her nod gratefully, the first genuine gratitude I'd seen from her since she'd returned. "She's learning," I said quietly. By noon, Sarah was exhausted. She stumbled into the kitchen, her hands raw and bleeding, her clothes soaked with sweat and dirt. She sat down heavily at the table and put her head in her hands. I can't do this. Mama. I'm not strong enough. You're stronger than you think. You just haven't had to find that strength before. The other workers. They're watching me, waiting for me to quit. Are they waiting to see if you're worth their respect? She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. What's the difference? Respect has to be earned. Sarah. It can't be bought, inherited, or demanded. It comes from proving that you're willing to do what needs to be done, even when it's hard. That afternoon brought a new challenge. Word had gotten around Pueblo Creek that Sarah Clearwater Morrison was back home, working as a common ranch hand. The story was too juicy for the gossips to ignore, and several townspeople found excuses to visit the ranch, just to see the spectacle of the sheriff's daughter mucking stalls. I watched Sarah's face as she became aware of the attention. The shame was almost physical. She hunched her shoulders and tried to make herself invisible. But the work still had to be done. And Miguel wasn't inclined to give her any special consideration because she was embarrassed. Señorita, he called out, the chickens, they need feeding. And after that, the fence in the north pasture needs mending. Sarah nodded and trudged toward the chicken coop, her audience following at a discreet distance. I felt a stab of sympathy for her. But I also knew this was necessary. She needed to understand what it felt like to be judged, to be looked down upon, to be seen as less than she was. The breaking point came just before sunset. Sarah was trying to repair a section of fence that had been damaged by cattle, working with tools she barely knew how to use. When the wire snapped back and cut a deep gash across her palm, she cried out in pain and frustration, threw down the pliers, and sank to her knees in the dirt. I can't do this, she sobbed. I don't know how I've never done any of this before. Miguel approached her slowly, his expression softening for the first time all day. Señorita, he said gently, no one expects you to know everything on the first day, but they do expect you to keep trying. Why should I? Everyone's laughing at me. Everyone thinks I'm pathetic. Are they laughing? Miguel asked. Or are they watching to see if you have the heart of a Clearwater? He helped her to her feet and showed her how to wrap her wounded hand with a strip of cloth. Then, patiently, he demonstrated the proper way to handle fencing wire, how to use the tools, how to make repairs that would last. Your father, he said as they worked together. He was not born knowing how to be a sheriff. He learned by making mistakes, by asking questions, by getting up every time he fell down. That is what made him a good man, not that he never failed, but that he never stopped trying. I saw something change in Sarah's face at those words. The self-pity was still there, but it was joined by something else, a flicker of determination, maybe even pride. That evening, as Sarah soaked her blistered hands in salt water, she looked up at me with something approaching respect. Mama, how long did it take you to learn all this? Years, I said honestly. Your father and I learned together, making mistakes, figuring things out as we went along. The difference is that we were building something we wanted to keep. You're working to earn back something you threw away. Do you think I can do it? Really learn to do this work? I studied her face, looking for signs of genuine commitment beneath the exhaustion and pain. I think you can learn to do anything you set your mind to, Sarah. The question is whether you want to badly enough. I want to make things right, she said quietly. I want to be worthy of the Clearwater name again. Then tomorrow you'll get up before dawn, and you'll work harder than you did today. And the day after that, you'll work harder still. not because you have to, but because you want to. She nodded. And for the first time since she'd returned, I saw a glimpse of the daughter I'd hoped she would become, not the entitled woman who'd sold my ranch, but someone who was beginning to understand the difference between taking and earning, between demanding and deserving. It was a start. 3 weeks into Sarah's education, I began to see changes that went deeper than blistered hands and sore muscles. She was learning not just how to work, but how to work alongside people she'd previously ignored or dismissed. I watched from the kitchen window as Maria Morales taught Sarah how to milk the cows properly, her patient hands guiding my daughter's clumsy fingers. Sarah listened with an attention she'd never shown to anything I'd tried to teach her, asking questions in halting Spanish and accepting corrections without the sullen resistance that had marked her childhood. "Así, mija," Maria said gently, showing Sarah how to position the bucket. "Like this, daughter." The casual endearment made Sarah's eyes brighten, perhaps the first time in her adult life that someone had called her daughter because of her behavior rather than her birth. Miguel's sons, initially skeptical of the señorita who'd come home in disgrace, were beginning to include her in their easy camaraderie. I heard laughter from the barn where they were teaching her to braid rope, saw them nod approvingly when she managed to repair a section of fence without help. "She is learning," Miguel told me one evening as we watched Sarah struggle to load hay bales onto a wagon. "Not just the work, but the respeto. Yesterday, she asked my wife to teach her to make tortillas. Said she wanted to understand how to make a meal from simple things." It was a small thing, but significant. The Sarah who'd left for Europe would never have acknowledged that she had anything to learn from a Mexican ranch wife. This Sarah was discovering that wisdom came in many forms and from unexpected sources. The real test came on a Saturday morning when Chief Running Bear arrived with 2 of his nephews. Sarah was in the corral, working with a young horse that had been giving her trouble all week. Her technique was still clumsy, but her patience had improved dramatically. Running Bear watched for several minutes before approaching. Sarah saw him coming, and her face flushed, whether from embarrassment or something else. I couldn't tell. "Uncle," I said in Cheyenne, joining them at the corral fence. "What do you think of my daughter's progress?" "She moves differently now," he replied in the same language. "Less like someone who expects the world to step aside for her, more like someone who understands she must find her place in it." Sarah looked between us, obviously understanding that she was being discussed but not knowing what was being said. In the past, this would have irritated her. She'd always resented not understanding Cheyenne, had seen it as a barrier that excluded her from part of her heritage. "Uncle," she said hesitantly, Could you teach me some words I know I should have learned before, but I was..." She paused, searching for the right words. "I was ashamed of that part of who I am. I thought it made me less somehow." Running Bear's weathered face showed no expression, but I caught the quick glance he shot in my direction. This was the first time Sarah had ever expressed interest in her Cheyenne heritage, much less asked to learn about it. "What would you like to learn?" he asked in English. "Words for the work, for the animals, for..." She gestured around the ranch. "For home." Over the next hour, Running Bear taught Sarah basic Cheyenne words: moeje for horse, pive for water, mape for woman. She struggled with the pronunciation, but her effort was genuine. More importantly, she listened when he explained not just the words but their deeper meanings, how the Cheyenne saw horses as partners rather than possessions, how water was sacred and not to be wasted, how being a woman carried responsibilities as well as privileges. "Your mother," Running Bear told her. "She learned these things as a child, but learning them as a woman who has seen hardship, Maybe that teaches them more deeply. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Cornelius Blackwood rode up to the ranch house, but this time he came alone and without the arrogant confidence he'd displayed before. The Colorado Mining Consortium's legal troubles had apparently given him a new perspective on the situation. "Mrs. Clearwater," he said, dismounting carefully. "I was hoping we could discuss a resolution to our complications. Mr. Blackwood, I assume your company has finished reviewing the water rights situation." "We have, and we've also been informed that the medical documents we relied upon for the original sale are under investigation for fraud." He paused, watching Sarah work in the corral. "Is that your daughter?" "It is. She looks different than I expected." "Hard work has a way of changing people's appearance," I said dryly. Sarah had noticed our visitor and was walking toward us, leading the young horse she'd been training. Her clothes were dusty, her hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and there was a confidence in her movement that hadn't been there when she'd returned from Europe. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, nodding politely. "I remember you, Mrs. Morrison. I have to say, I'm surprised to find you here." "This is my home," Sarah replied simply. "I'm learning to deserve it." Blackwood looked confused by this response, but I felt a surge of pride. The old Sarah would have been defensive, would have tried to justify her actions or blame others. This Sarah was simply stating a fact. "Mr. Blackwood," I said, "what exactly is your company proposing? We'd like to negotiate a fair agreement for water access. We're also prepared to discuss compensation for the irregularities in our original purchase." "Irregularities? Is that what you're calling fraud now?" "Mrs. Clearwater, we acted in good faith based on the documentation provided. If that documentation was falsified, we're as much victims as you are." Sarah stepped forward. "Mr. Blackwood, my mother isn't a victim. She never was. I was the one who was foolish enough to think I could steal from someone stronger and smarter than myself." She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "The fraud was mine, and I'll be paying for it for a very long time." The admission clearly surprised Blackwood, but it didn't surprise me. Over the past weeks, I'd watched Sarah gradually stop making excuses and start taking responsibility. It was perhaps the most important skill she was learning. "Well," Blackwood said after a moment, "perhaps we could discuss terms that would be mutually beneficial. The consortium is prepared to offer substantial compensation for water rights, and we could certainly use someone with local knowledge to help manage our operations." "Someone like my daughter?" I asked. "If she's interested in honest employment?" "Yes." Sarah looked at me, a question in her eyes. I could see her weighing the offer, the chance to earn real money, to use skills she was developing, to prove herself in a way that went beyond ranch work. "What would you say to Mr. Blackwood's offer?" I asked her. "I'd say that I'm not ready for that kind of responsibility yet. I'm still learning what it means to be trustworthy." She turned to Blackwood. "But if your company is serious about doing business honestly in this territory, you should know that you'll need to work with the whole community, the Mexican families, the Cheyenne, everyone who calls this valley home." "I see. And you think that's possible?" "I think," Sarah said, glancing at the workers who had become her teachers, "that I'm learning it's not only possible but necessary. This land doesn't belong to just one people or one way of thinking. It belongs to everyone who's willing to work for it and respect it." After Blackwood left, I found Sarah sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "You turned down good money," I observed. I turned down money I hadn't earned yet. There's a difference. She looked at me with eyes that had grown older and wiser over the past month. Mama, I think I'm beginning to understand what Daddy saw in this place. Why he wanted to protect it. What do you see? I see people taking care of each other. I see different kinds of strength working together. I see. She paused, searching for words. I see home, real home, not just a place to live. For the first time since she'd returned, I reached over and took her work-roughened hand in mine. Welcome home, daughter. 2 days after I'd welcomed Sarah home with those simple words, Chief Running Bear arrived at dawn with a proposal that surprised even me. Nako, he said in Cheyenne. Your daughter has been learning our words, our ways of seeing, but words are not enough. If she truly wishes to understand who she is, she must participate in the ceremonies that connect her to her ancestors. I looked at Sarah, who was feeding the chickens nearby. Over the past month, she'd grown lean and strong from the physical work, but more importantly, she'd developed a quiet dignity that came from earning her place rather than demanding it. What kind of ceremony, Uncle? A naming ceremony. She was given a white name at birth, but she has never received her Cheyenne name. Without it, she is only half of who she could be. The idea both thrilled and worried me. Cheyenne naming ceremonies were sacred, not performances for outsiders. If Running Bear was suggesting this, it meant he believed Sarah had truly changed, that she was ready to be accepted not just as someone learning Cheyenne words, but as a member of the people. When would this happen? At the new moon, when the spirits can see most clearly into a person's heart. But first, she must prepare. She must fast. She must purify herself. And she must demonstrate that she understands what it means to be responsible to the community, not just to herself. Sarah approached us, having finished her morning chores. Uncle Running Bear, Mama, you're speaking about me, aren't you? Yes. Granddaughter, Running Bear said in English, using the term that indicated not just family relationship but respect. I am asking if you wish to receive your Cheyenne name, to be formally welcomed into the people of your grandmother's blood. Sarah's face went very still. I would be honored, but I don't know if I'm worthy of such a thing. Worthiness is not something you are born with, Running Bear replied. It is something you earn through your choices, your actions, your willingness to put the good of the people before your own desires. Then I want to try. I want to learn. The preparation took a week. Sarah fasted for 2 days, drinking only water and eating only what Running Bear prescribed roots and herbs that would purify her body and clarify her spirit. She spent hours in meditation, learning prayers in Cheyenne, understanding the responsibilities that would come with her new identity. I watched her during this time with a mixture of pride and amazement. The woman who had once spent hours in front of mirrors, who had cared more about her appearance than her character, now sat quietly by the river, her hair unbraided, her face free of artifice, listening to the teachings of her elders. The ceremony itself was held in the grove where Thomas used to meet with tribal representatives, where agreements had been made and disputes settled. Running Bear had invited not just his Cheyenne relatives, but also Miguel and Maria, Doc Eleanor, and several other community members who had witnessed Sarah's transformation. As the sun set behind the mountains, Sarah knelt in the center of a circle marked with sacred symbols. She wore a simple white dress that Maria had sewn for the occasion, and around her neck was the silver medallion my mother had made, the one showing a woman standing between 2 horses. Running Bear began the ceremony with prayers in Cheyenne, calling on the spirits of the 4 directions to witness what was about to happen. He spoke of Sarah's journey, her mistakes, her fall, her willingness to learn and change. "This woman came to us broken," he said, his voice carrying across the grove. "Thinking she knew who she was, but knowing only what she wanted. She has learned that identity is not something you take, it is something you earn through service to others." He turned to Sarah, who remained kneeling with her head bowed. "Do you understand that to receive a Cheyenne name is to accept responsibility not just for yourself, but for all the people? Do you understand that you will be expected to use your gifts, your education, your position, your resources to help those who have less?" "I understand," Sarah said clearly. "I want to be worthy of that responsibility." "Then rise and receive the name the spirits have shown me for you." Sarah stood, and Running Bear placed his weathered hands on her shoulders. "Vi hoe mape," he said solemnly. "White Sky Woman, like your mother, you are a bridge between worlds, but your path is different from hers. You will help the white world understand the native world, and you will help our people navigate the changes that are coming." The name sent a shiver through me. It was perfect, acknowledging both sides of Sarah's heritage while giving her a role that was uniquely hers. "Vi hoe mape," Sarah repeated, testing the sound of her new identity. "White Sky Woman. With this name comes power," Running Bear continued, "but also obligation. You must never again use your advantages to harm others. You must remember that everything you have, your education, your family's wealth, your position in the white community, these are gifts to be shared, not hoarded." "I understand," Sarah said, and I could hear the weight of commitment in her voice. The ceremony concluded with a feast that brought together all the different peoples of our valley. Mexican families shared tamales and fresh tortillas. The Anglo settlers contributed roasted beef and fresh bread. The Cheyenne brought traditional foods, dried buffalo, wild rice, and herbal teas that had been used in ceremonies for generations. I watched Sarah Vi hoe mape move through the gathering, speaking Spanish with Miguel's children, English with the ranch families, and halting but determined Cheyenne with Running Bear's nephews. She was indeed becoming a bridge between worlds, but more than that, she was becoming herself in a way she never had before. "She is different now," Doc Eleanor observed, joining me as we watched Sarah help serve food to the elders. "Not just humbled, but centered. Like she finally knows who she's supposed to be." "She's found her purpose," I agreed. It took losing everything she thought she wanted for her to discover what she actually needed. As the evening wound down and families began to head home, Sarah approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mama, I know I can never undo the harm I caused. I know I can never give back the months of pain and worry I put you through. But I want you to know that I understand now what Daddy was trying to build here, what you've been protecting. What do you see now that you didn't see before? I see that wealth isn't just money, it's community. It's respect. It's knowing that you belong somewhere and that your life has meaning beyond just your own comfort." She paused, looking around at the grove where she'd been given a new name, a new identity. "I see that I've been given a second chance to be the daughter you deserved, and I don't intend to waste it." "Vi hoe mape," I said, using her Cheyenne name for the first time. "You are exactly the daughter I always hoped you would become." That night, as I prepared for bed, I found a letter on my pillow in Sarah's handwriting. "Dearest Mama, tomorrow I want to ask you to tell me about the silver mine, the railroad stocks, and all the other assets Daddy left us. Not because I want to spend them or control them, but because I want to learn how to help you manage them wisely. I want to understand how we can use our wealth to protect this community, to ensure that what happened with the mining company never happens again. I want to learn how to be a good steward of what we've been given. I know I have years of work ahead of me to truly earn your trust. But I'm ready for that work. I'm ready to be Vi'ihoe Mape, White Sky Woman, bridge between worlds. With love and respect, your daughter. I held the letter against my heart and smiled. Thomas had been right. Sometimes the hardest lessons were the most valuable ones. And sometimes, losing everything was the only way to discover what really mattered. The morning after Sarah received her Cheyenne name, I found her letter on my pillow and knew the time had finally come. She was ready to learn what her father had really left us, ready to understand the true scope of our responsibilities. I found her in the kitchen before dawn, making coffee with the quiet efficiency she'd learned from Maria. The silver medallion from her naming ceremony caught the lamplight as she moved, a reminder of how far she'd traveled from the woman who'd sold our ranch. Vi'ihoe Mape, I said, using her new name. Are you ready to learn what your father really built? She turned from the stove, her eyes serious but unafraid. I think so, Mama, but I need you to know that I'm not asking because I want to control it. I want to understand it so I can help protect what we've built here. I led her to Thomas's study, withdrawing the documents Sam Morrison had helped me organize. Your father was not just the sheriff of Pueblo Creek. He was one of the largest landowners and investors in Colorado Territory. Sarah's eyes widened as she examined the silver mine deed, $3,000 monthly profit for 3 years. Mama, this has been operating all this time. Your father started small, reinvesting every profit. Every dollar we saved, he multiplied. I showed her the railroad certificates, property deeds, bank statements. This ranch was never our only asset. It was simply where we chose to live. She sat heavily in Thomas's chair. How much are we worth? More than $250,000. Maybe more. I'm still discovering investments Thomas made. $250,000. She looked up with something approaching awe. That's more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. Which is why your father kept it secret. He didn't want wealth to change who we were. I pulled out the map showing our scattered holdings. We own town lots in Denver and Colorado Springs, grazing land in 3 counties, a hotel in Leadville. She studied the map, tracing boundaries with her finger. We could live anywhere, move to Denver, live in luxury. We could. Is that what you want? She looked out at the valley where she'd learned to work, found her identity, received her Cheyenne name. No. This is home. These people are our responsibility. If we have this wealth, we should use it to protect them. It was the answer I'd hoped for. Using wealth responsibly is harder than earning it. Sarah. Every decision affects dozens of families. Are you prepared for that? I want to learn how Daddy managed all this while still being the sheriff everyone trusted. I showed her Thomas's correspondence, his investment strategies, his community-focused philosophy. Your father never made a business decision without considering how it would affect everyone in the valley. The hotel in Leadville, he insisted on hiring local workers. The railroad stocks, he chose companies committed to serving the territory, not just extracting wealth from it. He was building security for the whole community, Sarah said, understanding dawning. Exactly. And now that responsibility falls to us? We spent the morning reviewing documents, with Sarah asking thoughtful questions about balancing profit with community benefit. Her grasp of the ethical complexities impressed me. What about the Colorado Mining Consortium? She asked. They're still operating on fraudulently purchased land. What do you think we should do? She considered carefully. Negotiate from strength. They need to understand they're dealing with a community, not just individuals. Any agreement should benefit everyone in the valley. And if they refuse, then we use our resources to make their operation unprofitable. We can afford legal battles they can't. I felt Thomas's pride flowing through me at her strategic thinking. There's something else, I said, producing a final document. We own the land where Pueblo Creek sits. Your father bought it, then leased it back to the town for a nominal fee. Sarah stared at the deed. We own the town, which means we're responsible for ensuring it thrives as a place where different peoples can live together peacefully. She was quiet, absorbing the full scope of her inheritance, not just wealth, but responsibility for an entire community's well-being. I understand now why you let me hit rock bottom, she said finally. If you'd just given me money when I returned, I never would have learned what it means to be worthy of this responsibility. And are you worthy of it? She met my eyes with hard-earned wisdom. I'm going to spend my life trying to be, but yes, I think I'm ready to start learning. Then tomorrow, we ride to Denver. It's time you met our business partners and learned how to manage an empire built on community rather than conquest. The train ride to Denver gave Sarah her first taste of traveling as a woman of substance rather than a desperate fugitive. We rode in a private compartment that Thomas had maintained for years, and I watched my daughter's amazement as she realized the extent of our family's quiet influence throughout Colorado territory. The conductor knows you, she observed as the uniformed man tipped his hat respectfully when he collected our tickets. Your father was one of the railroad's earliest investors. We've been riding this line for years. I smiled at her expression. Sarah, you're about to discover that Thomas built relationships as carefully as he built wealth. Denver in 1885 was a bustling city of nearly 100,000 people, fed by silver mines and railroad money. Our hotel, the Continental, which I now revealed we owned a controlling interest in, occupied an entire city block. The manager greeted us personally, and I saw Sarah beginning to understand the true scope of our empire. Sam Morrison met us in the hotel's private dining room, accompanied by 3 men I'd never seen before but whose expensive suits and careful manners marked them as serious businessmen. Martha, vi hoe mapi, Sam said, using Sarah's Cheyenne name with obvious respect. I'd like you to meet our partners. James Whitfield manages our Denver properties. Robert Chen oversees our mining investments. And David Strongbear handles our railroad portfolio. Sarah's eyes widened at the last name. Strongbear, are you Cheyenne? Half, the man replied in accented English. Like you. Your father believed that success in the territory required understanding all its peoples. Over the next 2 hours, these men laid out the complete picture of Thomas's empire. Properties in 6 cities, mining claims in 4 different mountain ranges, railroad stocks that paid quarterly dividends of thousands of dollars, banking investments that had survived 3 financial panics. The total value, Sam said quietly, is approaching $500,000. Sarah sat back in her chair, overwhelmed. $500,000. Mama, we're not just wealthy, we're one of the richest families in Colorado territory. Which brings both opportunity and responsibility, I said. Tell them about the Colorado Mining Consortium situation. Sarah straightened, and I saw her transform from amazed daughter to strategic businesswoman. The consortium bought our ranch through fraudulent means, using forged medical documents. They're now operating without proper water rights, which we control. But rather than simply crushing them, we want to negotiate a solution that benefits our entire community. Whitfield leaned forward, interested. What kind of solution? They need water access, which we can provide, but any agreement must include employment for local workers, environmental protections for the valley, and profit sharing with the community they're operating in. And if they refuse, asked Chen. Sarah's smile reminded me of Thomas when he was planning strategy. Then we make their operation unprofitable. We can afford legal challenges they can't. We can buy up surrounding properties they need for expansion. We can even start competing mining operations that undercut their prices. Aggressive but fair, Strong Bear observed approvingly. Your father would be proud. There's more, I added. We want to establish a community development fund, using our mining profits to build schools, improve roads, and support families in the valley. Sarah will oversee this project. I will. Sarah looked surprised. You will. It's time you learn to use wealth as a tool for building rather than taking. The meeting concluded with detailed plans for the mining company negotiations and the establishment of what we decided to call the Clearwater Community Foundation. Sarah would return to Denver monthly to manage our business interests while living on the ranch and maintaining her connection to the community that had taught her who she really was. As we prepared to leave, Sam pulled me aside. Martha, she's remarkable. Completely different from the woman who tried to sell your ranch 6 months ago. She learned what Thomas always knew, that real wealth comes from lifting others up, not from pushing them down. On the train home, Sarah stared out the window at the mountains and plains that were, in large part, ours to protect and develop. Mama, she said quietly, I understand now why you let me fall so far. If you'd simply told me about all this when I came back, I would have seen it as my inheritance rather than my responsibility. And now I see it as the tools I need to build the kind of community Daddy envisioned, where different peoples can thrive together, where wealth serves everyone, not just the wealthy. Then you're ready for the final step. Which is, I smiled, thinking of the letter waiting at home from the Territorial Attorney General's office. Tomorrow, we're going to teach the Colorado Mining Consortium what happens when they try to steal from a family that owns half of Colorado territory. The final confrontation with the Colorado Mining Consortium came sooner than expected. Cornelius Blackwood arrived at our ranch the day after we returned from Denver, but this time he brought the company's regional director and their chief legal counsel clear signs that they finally understood who they were dealing with. I met them on the porch with Sarah at my side, both of us dressed in our finest clothes and wearing our Cheyenne silver. Let them see exactly what kind of women they'd tried to cheat. Mrs. Clearwater, Blackwood said, his earlier arrogance replaced by nervous respect. We've come to discuss a resolution to our situation. Mr. Blackwood. Gentlemen, I assume you've had time to research the water rights issue more thoroughly. The legal counsel, a thin man with worried eyes, consulted his papers. Mrs. Clearwater, our investigation has revealed that the original sale of your ranch was indeed based on fraudulent medical documents. We're prepared to void the contract and return the property. How generous, Sarah said dryly. Returning stolen property is hardly a favor. The regional director, a heavy-set man named Morrison, no relation to my banker, leaned forward. Mrs. Clearwater, we understand there may have been irregularities in our acquisition, but the consortium has already invested significant resources in this operation. Surely we can reach an accommodation that benefits everyone. What kind of accommodation? I asked. We'd like to lease the mining rights from you, with guaranteed water access. We're prepared to offer very generous terms. Before I could respond, Chief Running Bear rode into the yard with a dozen Cheyenne warriors. all armed and looking like they were prepared for serious business. Behind them came Miguel with the Mexican ranch workers, and Doc Eleanor with several of the Anglo families from town. The mining company men looked nervously at this gathering, clearly not understanding what they were witnessing. "Uncle," I said in Cheyenne, "thank you for coming. These men want to discuss the future of our valley." "Nako," Running Bear replied, dismounting and approaching the porch. "We have come to witness justice being done." "What's he saying?" Morrison asked nervously. "He's saying that this community has come to see how you conduct business," Sarah translated, her voice carrying new authority. "In our culture, important decisions are made in front of the people who will be affected by them." I stood up, feeling the power of two peoples flowing through me, the legal authority of my wealth and the moral authority of my heritage. "Gentlemen, you came to our territory and tried to steal our land through fraud. You declared me mentally incompetent without ever meeting me. You assumed that a half-Cheyenne woman would be easy to cheat and dismiss." "Mrs. Clearwater," the legal counsel interrupted, "we acted on documentation provided to us. If that documentation was fraudulent, it was fraudulent," Sarah said firmly. "I provided it, and I take full responsibility for that crime. But you never bothered to verify it because you assumed an Indian woman wouldn't know how to fight back." Morrison's face was growing red. "Now see here. We're trying to be reasonable." "Reasonable." I pulled out the folder of documents we'd brought from Denver. "Let me tell you what reasonable looks like." I spread the papers on the porch table: property deeds, stock certificates, business partnerships that showed the true scope of our holdings. "These documents show that my family owns more of Colorado territory than your company will ever control. We own the hotel where your executives stay in Denver. We own stock in the railroad that brings your equipment. We own the bank that holds your operating loans." The three men stared at the papers, their faces growing pale as they began to understand the magnitude of their miscalculation. "Furthermore," Sarah added, producing her own set of documents, "we've filed formal complaints with the Territorial Attorney General about your use of fraudulent medical documents. We've also initiated legal proceedings to challenge every permit and license your company holds in Colorado. But we're willing to negotiate," Blackwood stammered. "Now you are," I said. "But 6 months ago, you rode onto my land and tried to evict me from my own home. You treated my community like obstacles to be removed rather than people to be respected." Chief Running Bear stepped forward. "In the old days," he said in English, "when someone stole from the people, they were made to give back twice what they took. It was called justice." "What do you want?" Morrison asked desperately. Sarah smiled, and I saw Thomas's strategic mind at work in her expression. "We want you to become the kind of company that builds communities instead of destroying them. We want you to hire local workers, respect environmental concerns, and share your profits with the people whose land you're working. And if we refuse, then you'll discover what it's like to fight a legal battle against people who can afford better lawyers than you can," I said calmly. "You'll find your permits challenged, your loans called in, and your operations shut down piece by piece." The silence stretched for a long moment before Morrison finally nodded. "What are your specific terms?" as Sarah outlined our conditions: fair wages, environmental protections, community profit sharing, and respect for both Anglo and Native rights. I felt a deep satisfaction. This was justice as Thomas would have understood it, not revenge, but education, not destruction, but transformation. The mining company would learn to do business honestly, or they would find themselves unable to do business at all. And my daughter, Vi Ihoe Mape, White Sky Woman, had proven herself worthy of the power and responsibility she'd inherited. 6 months later, I stood on the same porch where Cornelius Blackwood had once tried to evict me, watching a scene that would have seemed impossible a year ago. The Clearwater Ranch had become the unofficial headquarters for what people were calling the Colorado Cooperation, an alliance between mining companies, ranching families, Mexican communities, and Cheyenne bands that was changing how business was done throughout the territory. Sarah Viejoe Mape emerged from the house carrying ledgers and correspondence, her movements confident and purposeful. The transformation was complete from the selfish woman who'd sold our ranch to the community leader who now managed a $500,000 empire with wisdom and grace. "Mama," she said, joining me on the porch. "The quarterly reports are in. The Clearwater Foundation has funded 3 new schools, improved roads in 2 counties, and provided startup loans to 47 families. And the mining operations, profitable for everyone involved. The consortium is paying 30% above standard wages. The environmental protections are working, and the community profit sharing has brought prosperity to the entire valley." Through the yard, I could see the evidence of our success. Miguel's son Carlos was now the assistant foreman of the mining operation, having learned engineering from company experts. Doc Eleanor had opened a second clinic with foundation funding. Chief Running Bear's nephews worked as cultural liaisons, ensuring that sacred sites were protected and traditional knowledge was respected. The afternoon brought our monthly community gathering, but these meetings were different from the desperate strategy sessions of a year ago. Now they were celebrations of shared success, planning sessions for future projects, and opportunities for different peoples to learn from each other. "Mrs. Clearwater," called Tom Henderson as families began arriving. "I wanted to thank you again for the loan that let us expand our herd. We'll have it paid back within 2 years. Take 3 years if you need it, Tom. The foundation exists to help families build stability, not to make quick profits." Maria Morales approached with her youngest daughter, a bright girl of 12 who'd been accepted to the new Territorial Teachers College with foundation support. "Comadre," Maria said, embracing me warmly. Isabella received her acceptance letter. She'll be the first in our family to become a teacher. "Your family's knowledge and wisdom deserve to be shared," I replied. "Isabella will help build bridges between communities." As the sun began to set, Chief Running Bear called for attention. The gathering quieted as the old chief rose to speak a ritual that had become central to our monthly meetings. "1 year ago," he said in English so everyone could understand, "this valley was divided by fear, greed, and misunderstanding. White men fought Mexican families. The Cheyenne were seen as obstacles to progress. Families betrayed each other for money." His eyes found Sarah in the crowd. "But sometimes, the spirits send us teachers disguised as troubles. Sometimes we must lose everything we think we want to discover what we truly need." Sarah stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly across the gathering. "Uncle speaks truly. I was one of those troubles, a daughter who valued money more than family, who was ashamed of her heritage instead of proud of it. But this community taught me that real wealth comes from lifting others up, not from pushing them down." "And now?" Running Bear asked. "Now I understand that being Viejoe Mape White Sky Woman means being a bridge between worlds. It means using the privileges I was born with to create opportunities for others. It means remembering that everything we have is a gift to be shared, not a treasure to be hoarded." The applause that followed was warm and genuine. These people had watched Sarah's transformation from entitled betrayer to community leader, and they'd accepted her not because of her family's wealth, but because of her commitment to using that wealth wisely. As the formal meeting ended and people began sharing food and conversation, I found myself thinking about Thomas. He would have been amazed by what his careful planning had achieved, not just financial security, but genuine community harmony. "Mama," Sarah said, joining me as I watched children of different backgrounds playing together in the yard. "I've been thinking about the future." "What kind of future?" "I want to establish a school here on the ranch, a place where Anglo, Mexican, and Cheyenne children can learn together, where they can study English and Spanish and Cheyenne, where they can learn both traditional skills and modern subjects." It was a beautiful vision, and one that would ensure our community's values continued into the next generation. "And I want to expand the Foundation's work beyond Colorado," she continued. "There are communities throughout the West that could benefit from what we've learned here, that cooperation is more profitable than competition, that diversity is strength, that wealth without wisdom is worthless." I smiled, seeing in my daughter the woman I'd always hoped she could become. "Then let's build that future together." As the stars appeared over the mountains, I felt a deep peace. We had created something Thomas would have been proud of, not just prosperity, but justice. Not just success, but harmony. Not just wealth, but wisdom. The Clearwater Ranch had become what it was always meant to be: a bridge between worlds, a place where different peoples could thrive together, and a testament to the truth that the greatest victories come not from conquering others, but from lifting them up alongside you. Looking back on that year of transformation, I realized that the most powerful betrayal stories aren't always about the betrayal itself, they're about what comes after. When Sarah sold our ranch and declared me incompetent, she thought she was writing the end of my story. Instead, she was beginning the most important chapter of both our lives. The frontier taught me that betrayal stories have the power to destroy or to educate, depending on how we choose to respond. I could have used Thomas's hidden wealth to crush my daughter, to make her pay for every moment of pain she'd caused me. But revenge would have left us both poorer than we started, rich in money, perhaps, but bankrupt in everything that truly matters. Instead, I chose to let her betrayal become her teacher. I watched her learn through hardship what privilege had never taught her: that respect must be earned, that family bonds are more valuable than gold, and that true strength comes from lifting others up rather than pushing them down. The greatest betrayal stories aren't tragedies, they're transformation tales. They show us that sometimes we must lose everything we think we want to discover what we truly need. Sarah's betrayal nearly destroyed our family, but it also gave us the chance to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of genuine respect and shared purpose. In the end, the woman who tried to steal my legacy became the daughter who helped me build something far greater than either of us could have created alone.